It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show, and football season has started. It doesn't mean that baseball has gone away, although yesterday the contest sizes were pretty small, but a little bit back to normal today because we do have a Friday and there's no football today. So DraftKings, FanDuel, they care a little bit more about the MLB product today. And today's show is sponsored by Jock Market as well. So thanks to them for sponsoring the show. We'll be talking more about them later. But first, Adam, how'd you enjoy NFL opening night?
The game was good. The last drive for Tampa Bay was pretty expensive for me, but yeah, it was a good game. Nice to get football back. Excited for that. Not my favorite actual sport, but it's fun for DFS. It's a change of pace from baseball. So yeah, I'm excited that the season's going. Looking forward to Sunday.
Yeah, and the other thing, that was actually one of the more enjoyable opening night / Thursday night football games I can remember. It was definitely fun to watch. So it was good. It was a good mix up, and obviously there's going to be a big football contest this week. Lots of milli makers. And if you guys are new to the channel, which maybe for baseball you aren't, but if you haven't checked out our football content, there's going to be a ton of it coming. We've got football shows basically throughout the day, every week for the next few months. So you want to be liking this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to have all kinds of NFL DFS content covered as well. So you want to check all of that out. But for now, we've got this baseball slate to talk about, and starting with the Toronto Blue Jays playing against the Baltimore Orioles. And we don't yet have the ownership up on the site. We don't have top stack store, top pitcher store, anything like that. That'll probably get updated somewhere around the middle of the show because new baseball start times, and usually those guys, they're sleeping this time of day. They haven't updated the data yet, but I assume Robbie Ray is going to be the chalk pitcher of the day on both FanDuel and DraftKings. And if you look at the underlying numbers for Robbie Ray, there's a lot to indicate he's been very lucky this year. The BABIP has been a little lucky. The left on base percentage has also been lucky. I don't think he's going to regress in this spot against the Orioles, and he's kind of running out of time to regress this year. So just due to the matchup against Baltimore, it's going to be pretty hard to avoid Robbie Ray.
Yeah, and I mean, from a strikeout standpoint, he's been pretty close to matchup proof, 32.3% strikeout percentage this year. The big thing for him is that he's lowered his walk rate down to 6.4%. He's always been a good strikeout pitcher, but the issue you ran into in the past is, not only did he put himself in riskier situations by walking so many guys, but he'd also drive up his pitch count, kind of, Blake Snell style, where it was just hard for him to go more than 5 innings because between the walks and the strikeouts, he's throwing so many pitches. You're not having that issue this year anymore. He's been excellent. The matchup against Baltimore, I think it's fine. It's not my favorite matchup. Like they've been above average against left-handed pitching all season long. They have Mancini back. They could have Urias back. The lineup really isn't that bad, but that's not going to deter me from going to Robbie Ray. He is priced up to 10-7 on DraftKings. So this is a slate where, we've seen at times this year where DraftKings, even the best pitchers are like 10-1, 10-2. You've gotten a little bit of a price bump here going to Ray. But with it being a 13-game slate, I think there's probably going to be plenty of value that you can get to bats-wise that is going to make it relatively easy to pay for Ray.
And even though it's a big slate, there aren't that many pitchers that I love paying up for. We've got Tyler Mahle. He's been a little bit inconsistent this year. He's on the road in St. Louis. Joe Musgrove, we know how inconsistent he's been. He's a very difficult matchup in Los Angeles against the Dodgers. And then, Framber Valdez against the Angels, that's clearly a great spot. Shohei Ohtani is going to be on the mound, but he's on the road in Houston. I just don't know there's that many guys that I really feel great about paying up for. And we'll see what the ownership looks like when it gets updated. I'm going to guess Robbie Ray just gut feel here is probably somewhere around like the 40% owned range today on DraftKings. FanDuel probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15 to 20%. I think he's going to be very popular, but for a good reason. And without much doubt, would you agree, Robbie Ray, you have to play him in cash games?
Yeah, I would think that's how it looks right now. Like you said, there's plenty of good pitchers on the slate, but there's not a lot of great matchups. And then there's also the pricing is tough. Like not only do guys like Musgrove have tough matchups, they're also expensive. Tyler Mahle, he's someone that is really popular sometimes. He's got an okay matchup against the Cardinals, but even he's almost 10K on DraftKings. So I would expect that you're getting to Ray, especially because, again, with there being 13 games, it's not only just the pitching, it's the fact you're going to just have so many, $2,700 hitters in good spots. It's not going to be that difficult.
And then on the other side, just assuming now we're under the impression Robbie Ray is going to be massively popular on the slate, 13 games. So there are a lot of offenses to choose from. And it's going to be a spot where we can't necessarily, stack everybody. But the Baltimore Orioles, is this a team that just for potential leverage purposes, you think you might want to get a few shares of in tournaments?
I mean, I don't mind it because you do have power here. I think ideally I would just kind of be mixing in like two mans, three mans. It's unlikely that any particular team is the top stack. Obviously, that's kind of how baseball works. But for a team like the Orioles, I mean, there's 25 other teams to choose from. They have arguably the most difficult matchup on the slate. But you do have a $3,100 Hayes, $3,700 Mancini, Mountcastle at 42, Santander at 3,300. Ray does give up some power, 162 expected ISO to righties this year. Overall, he's allowed 1.36 home runs per nine. He's expensive enough where I think from a negative correlation standpoint, you don't necessarily need 5 Orioles against him. Like if you just happen to get the 1 or 2 that hit home runs and you get, a 2-run home run from Hayes, a 2-run shot from Mancini, $10,700 Robbie Ray is ruined anyway. You don't need, the Orioles to be the top scoring stack on the slate. You kind of just, that's at that price tag. I think that's sort of enough. So more so thinking, one-offs, 2 mans, 3 mans from the Orioles.
And then as for the Blue Jays offense, I assume that they are also going to be very, very popular in this matchup against Ellis, who not only is he not a particularly great pitcher, the Orioles don't have a good bullpen behind him. The Jays, by a little bit of a margin, have the overall top implied team total of any team on the slate today. There is some expensive pricing here on both FanDuel and DraftKings, which maybe that limits the ownership some, but I expect the Toronto Blue Jays to be one of the, if not the most popular teams once we get an ownership update. So there are expensive price tags here, but what do you think you're going to be looking to do with Toronto here?
Yeah, I mean, I expect them to be popular as well. With it being a 13-game slate, though, the raw ownership does come down a bit, so it's a little bit less concerning to me. It's obviously it's if you're the most popular hitter or most popular team on a slate, but most of your hitters are like 11% owned, obviously it's easier to work with that than when you have these 5-game slates where the team is all 25%. So probably I kind of doubt that at their prices they get enough ownership that I'm really scared away from them. I think it is a really good spot against Ellis. He's not someone that projects to be any sort of good major league pitcher. We've said it before about the Orioles. They're basically at a point right now where they are promoting pitchers to the major leagues who have had some success at AAA, but aren't going to be good enough to be major league pitchers, but they're actual potentially good future pitchers. They're holding back because 1, they have no interest in winning games right now, and 2, they don't want to start service clocks. So you're just getting guys coming up. It's not, you get some teams where it's like, oh, this is a rookie and he's, their 3rd prospect. That's not what the Orioles are doing right now. You can feel pretty comfortable that most guys that they bring up and start are just not going to be good. That's the case for Ellis. Very limited sample so far, but he's allowed a 278 expected ISO to righties, 393 expected WOBA. Not exactly what you want if you're a pitcher going up against all the right-handed power in this lineup for Toronto. Absolutely love the spot. And like you said, also the bullpen behind Ellis, something we had mentioned on a show the other day. I don't remember if it was me and you or me and I don't remember who I was with, but the subject of bullpens came up. And my point was pretty much like, I don't want to like hone in too much on that aspect because you're still over the course of a baseball slate, you're still basically just hoping to run really good and your offense does well against whoever's out there. But it's certainly a plus when that whoever's coming in after the starter isn't likely to be very good either.
Yeah, and then I mean, even talking about because you did mention that Orioles, they've brought up some pitchers who had some success in the minor leagues. Ellis is not one of those pitchers. He has been absolutely terrible in the minor leagues. If you look at his, and by the way, he didn't even spend time in the Orioles minor league system. He spent time in the Tampa Bay Rays AAA system this year. He made 15 appearances for Tampa Bay, 13 starts, 6.32 ERA, 6.04 FIP. And then you go, all right, maybe he was good in previous years with no 2020 minor league data. 2019 in AAA with the St. Louis Cardinals. He had 9.5 FIP. He's 28 years old. This is the gas can of all gas cans. So Chris Ellis is somebody who, unless there's just totally absurd ownership with Toronto Blue Jays, where we find out this team's going to be 25, 30% owned, but like you said, 13 game slate that could mute the ownership. Tampa Rays do look like a very high priority offense to pay up for. Next game we have here to talk about the Colorado Rockies against the Philadelphia Phillies. And let's start with the Phillies, who right now I have Bailey Falter listed as the likely opener for them. It appears it's going to be a bullpen game. To me, I look at the Philadelphia Phillies. They don't have a great bullpen, but the Rockies, particularly on the road, don't have a great offense. So to me, this seems like a spot I'm probably not going to be all that interested in either side.
Yeah, it doesn't seem very interesting to me. It doesn't seem like we're going to have, at least the way things look right now, doesn't seem like we're going to have a pitcher to use from the Phillies from a DFS standpoint. And then the Rockies, they're terrible outside of Coors Field. They aren't going to be giving you any sort of negative correlation with the field. Yeah, it's a really tough sell on either side.
So then, hey, 13 games, we found a spot that we could, just kind of cross off and move past, especially because coming up after this, we've got football shows. So Adam and I, we do have a hard out, and also all the more reason, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because we've got football coming up after this, and then there's going to be more baseball later in the day, and then after football, there's more football. So lots of that on the channel. But on the other side of the game, I don't really understand this price for German Marquez on DraftKings. 6,800. I mean, I guess that he's had some sketchy performances recently, and that's something that's driving down the price tag. But German Marquez has been so good over the course of the season. And don't forget some of those struggles. He had games, and, last time out against the Braves, he was actually reasonably decent, all things considered. He was pitching against the Braves at Coors Field. He pitched 5 innings, gave up 2 runs, 5 strikeouts. So 13.6 fantasy points at Coors Field against Atlanta is, not a major. I look at 6,800 for Marquez. That makes him a very high priority SP2.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know what's going on with the pricing here. He has struggled a bit recently, but fastball velocity has been fine. Looking at his pitch mix, like he's throwing his curveball a little bit less, he's throwing his slider a little bit more, but that's not. I don't really care which he prefers in any given game. Swinging strike percentage is outside of the game against Texas and the game against the Padres, it was down, but outside of that, it's been pretty good, even in his recent starts. I think it's probably just, a small sample size thing where Marquez is struggling. And even if it's not, he's priced like for that pitcher, basically. So it's not like we have to decide what to do with German Marquez at $9K with recent struggles. I don't really care about his recent struggles if you're going to drop his price, $3,000 off of where it should be. So you get him outside of Coors Field, where he's been good everywhere this year, but strikeout numbers are a little bit better outside of Coors at 24.8%, 3.56 xFIP. 7.3% walk percentage is about a point and a half lower than at home. It's not the easiest matchup against the Phillies, but at 6,800, again, I just kind of don't care about a whole lot other than how good German Marquez is.
Yeah, and then on the other side with the Philadelphia Phillies, once again, we don't have ownership, but I assume this is not going to be a priority stack for me unless there's something ridiculous where it's, like 0.6% projected ownership for the Phillies. I don't really think this is a team that's going to stand out unless it's just for massive contrarian reasons, or if German Marquez ends up being really popular. So if there's a situation where the Phillies are 0.6% projected owned and we've got Marquez with like 35% projected ownership, then I think the Phillies become a little bit reasonable. But just as it stands right now, without that kind of ownership information on the surface, the Phillies don't look very appealing.
Yeah, I mean, you would need, I think, something like 50+% ownership on Marquez for me to start getting there. And it's just another situation where with the slate being this size, you're kind of like, for lack of a better word, you're kind of naturally contrarian no matter what you do, because like there's just not going to be a lot of ownership going to most places. So it's just not a slate where I expect to be pushing up teams like the Phillies against Marquez.
All right, the next game we have here to talk about, it is the Detroit Tigers at home against the Tampa Bay Rays. It is going to be Matt Boyd on the mound for Detroit. And starting with this spot for the Tampa Bay Rays, we've talked about the Rays a decent amount over the last couple of weeks as being a team that has done really well in some mediocre to maybe difficult matchups. And Matt Boyd, I consider somewhere around the middle of the road as a starting pitcher, but I'm not sure this is going to be a spot where the Tampa Bay Rays generate a whole lot of ownership. And it's something we've seen a lot from the Tampa Bay Rays recently, where I think this could be another spot where we get a slightly overpriced Rays team that end up coming in at like 1% ownership with a 4 or 5% chance to be a top stack. So assuming that is the case, I think this could be another good contrarian spot against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's the case because like you were saying, Boyd's a pitcher that I have some respect for. He hasn't been very good this year, but it's not, that long ago we saw him be a good pitcher, at least in terms of strikeouts. He's kind of always had home run issues, but this is a park upgrade for Tampa Bay going into Detroit. It's a massive outfield and you'll get some frustrating 420-foot flyouts to center, but it is a park where generally on average balls are hit harder. It's definitely better than Tropicana Field. So that works in Tampa Bay's favor. And then you just have so much right-handed power here going up against Boyd. 172 expected ISO to righties this year, 327 expected WOBA. His strikeout rate's down to 19.9% overall, 1.03 home runs per nine, 4.79 xFIP for Boyd this season. So I think when you have as much power as you do in the Tampa Bay lineup, especially if they are significantly lower owned than a team like Toronto, I'm going to like getting there because the ceiling is really, really high.
Yeah, and we've seen them. Some of the recent games, they scored, was it like 13 runs when Eduardo Rodriguez was pitching? They scored something like 11 runs when Chris Sale was pitching recently. There's been spots where this team just picked up no ownership, and we've seen they have upside in any kind of matchup. Now, Matt Boyd, like we said, he's fine this year. He's clearly not the caliber of those pitchers, but this is a spot where I think people, generally the public, is not going to be that interested in Tampa Bay, and I think it could present some upside. Now, on the other side of the game, Michael Wacha is going to be on the mound for Tampa Bay, and a little bit of a price tag to him at 8,100 on DK. I'm not going to be interested in the Tigers in this spot, but I mean, Michael Wacha, at the kind of salary he has on FanDuel and DK, he's not an overly appealing pitching option either.
Yeah, I don't think so either. There's been a few slates recently where I've gotten to more Wacha than I anticipated or that I really wanted to, just because, of ownership considerations and lack of pitching options. But at his price and on a slate of this size, I doubt that's going to be the case here. The matchup is okay. Wacha is okay, I guess. 22.3% strikeout percentage this year, 4.02 xFIP. He's not the worst pitcher, but I think it's just a hard sell to pay $1,300 more for Wacha. He's $1,500 more than Ian Anderson against the Marlins. It's, I think, just going to be difficult to get Wacha, even though the matchup is okay.
Yeah, and I'm just checking. No ownership quite yet. Usually get that somewhere around 10. So I think that'll be coming in the next few minutes or so. But the next game we have to talk about here is the Milwaukee Brewers on the road in Cleveland take on the Indians. So AL ballpark, that means we're going to get the benefit of a DH added to the Brewers lineup. Eli Morgan on the mound for Cleveland. And Morgan's produced okay results this year. He's certainly giving up a decent amount of runs, but the strikeout stuff has been good. He's striking out 23.6% of hitters, walk rate 6.6%. So a little hard to know exactly what to make of Eli Morgan. Overall, I do expect he's probably going to regress a little bit because his minor league numbers weren't all that great. Zips has him projected as a guy with a 5.37 ERA. Steamer has him projected with a 5.2 ERA. So with the Milwaukee Brewers on the other side, expecting that there's going to be some kind of regression coming to Eli Morgan, I think this is a team that I'm going to be getting some stacks of.
Yeah, Morgan's a tough one for me because coming in, I expected him to struggle. He just based on, his minor league numbers, his pedigree, the fact that he doesn't have really good stuff. He's got a good changeup, but there's like 90 miles an hour. We've seen him struggle in terms of the power allowed. 197 expected ISO to righties, 285 to lefties. He's allowed 2 home runs per 9 innings. He's got a 5.48 ERA, 4.83 xFIP. He's struggled in that regard. The strikeout numbers are better than I expected at 23.6%. So we have seen him have, I think, more just, very good DFS outings than I thought we were going to get from him. But I'm still just kind of sticking to my expectations here. I think that he ends up not being very good. And I think it is a very good spot for Milwaukee. I would definitely pay a lot of attention to ownership here. The most expensive hitter in the projected lineup for the Brewers on DraftKings is Eduardo Escobar at $4K. Everyone else cheaper than that. They have almost a 5 implied run total. They're going to project as a very good point per dollar offense. Definitely a team that could end up going a little bit over-owned in terms of their chances of success, but that doesn't mean you have to just completely avoid them, especially on a slate like this, again, where going over-owned can mean something a lot different than on smaller slates where it's a lot of raw ownership. This is still likely to give you a lot of the best point per dollar values on the slate. I know Alex had a tweet about it the other day. I think it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it was accurate and true that people kind of overthink DFS, and that typically if you just have a lineup that mixes the good, the best point per dollar plays with a few sleepers, you're going to have a good lineup. And, obviously that oversimplifies it, but it's true. Like, you don't need to just be going away from the field in every spot of your lineup. There's going to be a lot of builds where it's just like, okay, well, I have these low owned hitters that look really good. What can I use to round this out that still gives me upside and projects well? And the Brewers are going to be really useful in cases like that.
Yeah, so in the crunch I ran right before we did the show, I was actually getting more exposure to the Brewers than any other team. And a lot of that's just due to the price points here. So I do expect this is going to be a massively popular team. I think, and this is also just my intuition, we should have ownership updates soon, but I think the two most popular stacks there are going to be the Toronto Blue Jays and the Milwaukee Brewers. Toronto, if people are going to be paying up and just looking at the run projection, and then just in terms of points per dollar projection, like you said with the Milwaukee Brewers, it's going to be hard to not end up with a bunch of them just due to the value. Like you said, Eduardo Escobar 4,000, Christian Yelich 3,900. And then even when you get down towards the bottom of the order, I mean, everybody else there is min price, and there's guys with power upside. Rowdy Tellez, min price, and he has some power upside. Dan Vogelbach, a little bit of power upside, min price. So even the guys at the bottom of the lineup, I do think are going to be some appealing plays to get to. And I'm hoping that we do get a situation where towards the bottom of the order, some of those guys have lower ownership. And something that could help us, Rowdy Tellez and Dan Vogelbach, both min price with only first base eligibility on DK. FanDuel, it's going to be a different situation just because we could play multiple first basemen. But I think that neither Tellez nor Vogelbach are going to be all that popular for that reason. So I think they're going to be looking like good one-offs to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We see that a lot with Baltimore. Even when we get slates where like Cedric Mullins and Hayes and those guys are picking up ownership, it always just ends up like being chopped in half for Mancini and Mountcastle because they, neither one, like they're both good. Neither one is drastically better than the other. I think you're right. You probably see that here. So it's not that like it's not that people are just ignoring the first baseman from Milwaukee, but because they are basically the same price and basically the same player, they even look the same to some extent. They're just going to get the ownership split there.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd be interested in is, so right now in our projected lineup, we have Rowdy Tellez projected to bat 7th, Dan Vogelbach batting 9th. It's potential there's a situation where Tellez, because of that, ended up being like 18% owned, maybe like 3 or 5%, somewhere in that neighborhood on Dan Vogelbach. If that's the case, the easiest way to differentiate any kind of chalky Brewer stacks is you just play the lower owned of the two first basemen. So that's what I'm hoping is the case, is that one of them ends up being popular, the other one less so. And then I hope that the one who's less popular actually ends up having a good game. And it's not, hey, the chalky first baseman of the two, which that would kind of be emblematic of what's happened in some of MLB DFS slates. Just the chalky one goes out and hits like 2 home runs or something. But I'm going to be trying to staking my claim to whoever is the lower owned of the two. And on the other side of the game, Adrian Hauser is going to be pitching for Milwaukee. Hauser, I think, is a fine starting pitcher, but generally he doesn't work super deep into games and not a lot of strikeout upside. He's not somebody that I generally put into my lineups.
Me neither. He was the slate winner last time out. He is stretched out now, which, is a plus. The matchup against Cleveland is pretty middle of the road, but I still don't really see a whole lot of reason to be going to Hauser on a slate of this size. It's not like he's really inexpensive either. It's 7,900 on DraftKings for the season. Only a 17.7% strikeout percentage, 4.34 xFIP. He's not a terrible pitcher or anything. He's just typically not a great DFS pitcher outside of his last start.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the strikeout rate, the walk rate, like you said. He's got an 18.2% K rate, which last year was 17.9. So for a while, he's been a low strikeout guy. And then also he walks a bunch of hitters. So that's something else that prevents him from going deep into games, is not only were they earlier in the season restricted with his pitch count, like you said, that's been less of the case lately. But when you're somebody who walks a lot of hitters, and then also you're generally not somebody who's throwing 100 plus pitches, that's something that makes it pretty difficult to go deep into games. Now, the next game we have here to talk about, it is two struggling New York teams, the Mets and the Yankees. The Yankees, who it looks like they were locked into a playoff spot just a week and a half ago, and they lose every night now, and all of a sudden they're on the fringes of the playoff race. But the Mets have kind of been out of the picture for a little while now, so these are two teams desperately in need of a win. Two pitchers on the mound who I kind of liked for fantasy purposes in general, in Tyler McGill and Jordan Montgomery. Now, McGill, I'm going to say this about him. It's a very tough matchup against the Yankees, but there are strikeouts to be had in the New York lineup. So if McGill ends up being a guy who's 1% owned, which I think could be the case, then he would be an interesting GPP option. He's actually somewhat popular that I wouldn't want any exposure to him. Yeah,
I'm sorry, we just got the ownership update, but it's going to change. I feel pretty comfortable saying. We have McGill projected for 22.5% ownership. I don't think there's really any way that happens. If it does, I won't go there. But yeah, like he's a decent strikeout pitcher. The matchup against the Yankees is dangerous, but there are some strikeouts in that lineup. If McGill is not projected for a lot of ownership, I don't mind going there. $8,100. He's, again, just been pretty good at getting strikeouts this year. The issue is just I don't really want to take a 22% owned pitcher if that actually holds against the Yankees here.
Yeah, that is a lot of ownership going to McGill. And also to recap some of the spots we've already talked about. Robbie Ray currently projected for 29% ownership, a little less than I thought it was going to be. That's pretty appealing looking from a GPP perspective. In terms of offenses, ownership share to the Toronto Blue Jays. By the way, also, this is something isn't quite right here because we have the Blue Jays only a 3.7% chance of being the top stack of the slate. That's definitely not the case. So we'll see where that looks when it updates. But yeah, go ahead.
I'll say we also kind of the same thing on the pitching side. We have Erman Marquez with a 5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, getting 6% ownership. So a lot of this is going to change throughout the day.
Yeah, although one thing I do agree with, the Milwaukee Brewers currently projected for a whole bunch of ownership, which is probably going to be the case. We have them projected as the most popular stack on the slate, and we still do have Robbie Ray being, somewhat popular. But yeah, this is definitely some data that's going to change just the first run of it, and it's going to look different as we go along. But Tyler McGill, if he's going to be 22% owned, I'm not interested in him, and I would be interested with the Yankees, but I don't think that's going to be the case with McGill.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, if he were going to get that much ownership, I would be stacking the Yankees a lot.
Yeah, and as it stands right now, we do have the Yankees with a 5.6% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. That seems about reasonable to me, and then we'll see where some of the ownership ends up coming in with these Yankees, with the Yankees when the ownership updates. But right now, we have them sub 1% ownership with over 5% chance to be a top stack. If that's the case, I do think they look like a pretty good contrarian team. The Yankees price tags are surprisingly low here. We've got Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge. They're both relatively expensive. Nobody else priced over 4,500. So the Yankees do present some good value here.
Yeah. Okay. So there's also a chance Taijuan Walker is pitching here. Fangraphs has Walker. DraftKings has Walker. MLB.com has McGill. So I think typically going with MLB.com is the preferred move. But there is some chance the pitcher changes, but I think the analysis is pretty similar. Like whether it's Walker or McGill, it's a pitcher that is solid, gets strikeouts, isn't, elite. And it puts the Yankees in a light where they're not super likely to do well. They have a 4.2 implied run total right now, but there is still tons and tons of power in this lineup. They are pretty fairly priced too. Aaron Judge is priced up to 5,600, but Rizzo, Gallo, LeMahieu, Torres, or Sanchez are all reasonably priced. I have no idea why Brett Gardner is suddenly the leadoff hitter again. On one hand, it gives you a really cheap leadoff hitter on the Yankees. On the other hand, it's Brett Gardner. Kind of have to weigh those two things against each other. But yeah, it's just kind of like a relatively low probability stack that it's one of those teams, though, where when they do well, like when the opposing pitcher has their C game, which is something that, just happens, the Yankees are the type of team that can just hit home run after home run after home run. And so that's why they end up, their top stack percentage just typically ends up being a little bit higher than some other teams that have similar implied run totals.
Yeah, and once again, there's a whole lot of power in the offense. It's a spot of the Yankees. We've talked about teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Blue Jays. There's some spots where they just don't pick up a lot of ownership, and kind of regardless of the matchup, that have been spots. You and I, the Astros being another one. Those have been spots where when those teams are 1% to 2% owned, you and I have getting to them just because, hey, these are really good offenses, a lot of power upside. If the field isn't there, we would like to be there. So see where the Yankees ownership ends up being in the next update. But as of now, they're somewhat low owned. If that's the case, I do think they're going to be interesting. Now, starting for the Yankees, Jordan Montgomery is a pitcher who also he's been up and down this year, but there is some strikeout upside there. And Jordan Montgomery is currently projected for 7% ownership. He's also pretty expensive at 9,400. So I don't know that's a price tag I really want to get to him, but there's some strikeout upside there.
Yeah, their strikeout upside. It's a pretty neutral matchup against the Mets. They've just been an average offense against left-handed pitching this year in terms of strikeouts, in terms of production. If Montgomery were like $1,400 less on DraftKings, I'd be pretty interested. But at 9,400, I think it's a pretty tough sell, especially when, at least right now, we do have him projected for some ownership, basically about where he should be owned. So no real strong feelings for me on Montgomery. Like if you're playing 150 lineups and he sneaks into a few, there's nothing wrong with that. He's going to be relatively low owned in a raw ownership sense. He's a good enough pitcher, but he's definitely not someone that stands out in terms of being super under owned or being one of the best point per dollar options. So I wouldn't expect to get a lot of him.
Yeah, and once again, 9,400, probably a little steeper than I want to pay for him, especially when there's a lot of other viable pitchers around that price range. Guys, don't forget, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. If you guys are not familiar with Jock Market, head on over, download the app in the Google Play Store and the Apple Store. It is a totally different way to play daily fantasy sports. We don't have to worry about lineup construction. Don't have to worry about salaries. It's the jock market. It's a stock market, but for jocks. Therefore, the jock market. There's an IPO period where you bid on the players beforehand, but just because the game starts doesn't mean you're done with the slate. You still buy and sell players after the slate starts. So fun way to play the games, and also just a different way to look at DFS. If you're making your first deposit, use the promo code Awesemo. That will get you a $50 bonus on your first deposit over at Jock Market. Now, the next game we have here to talk about some interesting pitching options. Ian Anderson on the mound for Atlanta against Miami. And Ian Anderson currently projected to be the most popular pitcher on the slate, considering his ridiculous price tag on DraftKings. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah, I think that the ownership comes down just because right now we have 6% going to Marquez. I think they end up being pretty close, but I still expect Anderson to be one of the most popular pitchers. When you're kind of, like one of the first things I typically do is just kind of scroll through the pitching on DraftKings and just like, mentally make a note of where I expect, what I think looks good. And it's like, you see Robbie Ray at the top, and then you're kind of just scrolling and it's just like, yeah, okay. Tough price, tough matchup, some of both. And then you get down to the Marquez Anderson too, where it's, Marquez at 6,800 and then Anderson against Miami at 6,600. And it's just like, yeah, okay. Both of these guys really stand out based on their talent level. In Anderson's case, the matchup, he was very bad in his last start, which was his second start back from the injured list. But that game was in Colorado. I'm not really too worried about that. The only real takeaway I have for Anderson recently is that he threw 86 pitches in his first start back against San Francisco, followed that up with 62 against Colorado. But that was a case where he was pitching poorly. It wasn't like he was pulled because he was at 62 pitches. So I think he's, for all intents and purposes, stretched out here, good to go. Assuming he pitches well, I think you get 90-ish pitches, and it's a very good matchup against Miami. So Anderson at 6,600, I think pretty clearly one of the top pitching options today.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to talk about here for cash game purposes on DraftKings, reasonable to say that Robbie Ray and Ian Anderson is the best combination given the information we have right now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning to. I'm just trying to think like who else. I don't even know who else I would consider outside of those two. Is there anybody else who? I mean, I guess maybe German Marquez if he ends up being super popular, but I feel better about the matchups that Ian Anderson and Robbie Ray have.
Yeah, I was going to say I think the third person in the conversation is Marquez, but I also think the conversation ends relatively quickly, and it's just you take Anderson against Miami.
Yeah, that is where I'm at here also. And then on the other side, Miami. No matter what the ownership is here on Anderson, well, I wouldn't say no matter what. If he's like 80% owned, I'd be interested in Miami. But as is, big slate, a lot of teams to choose from. I don't really think Miami's a spot I'm going to be going to get leverage.
Same. I will point out Josh Chisholm on DraftKings now does have second base and shortstop eligibility. That just always makes guys a little bit easier to get to. It also makes them a little bit more popular typically. So not necessarily like a huge thing that changes much, but it will just make them a little bit easier to get into lineups if you need someone in that price range.
And then the other side, Trevor Rogers is going to be starting for the Marlins. And Rogers was really, really good to start the year. He's tailed off a little bit as it's gone on, but still a pitcher that I consider to be very, very talented. And overall, his numbers for the year have been really strong. The biggest issue I have with the Atlanta Braves is just looking at some of the pricing here. Obviously, it's some talented hitters, but Austin Riley's 5,800, Freddie Freeman 5,600, Albies 5,000. Dansby Swanson 4,800. If you need a roster somebody who's a one-off, I think Jorge Soler, there's some power upside there at 3,900. But as a stack, I think they might be a little bit too expensive for me to really want to get to unless there's just no ownership going here.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. It strikes me as one of those teams where if the slate were smaller, I'd probably get to them a lot just because it would be a really good spot to pay up to be contrarian. But with ownership just flattened out more on a slate like this, it's a little bit less appealing to go there when you're not getting that much of an ownership discount off of some other really good teams. I do think there's massive upside here. Like I'm certainly not going to be upset if I get to the Braves. It's more so just, like they have the same implied run total as Tampa Bay, and the pricing is a lot better on Tampa. I'll be able to build better lineups around them. So assuming, just using Tampa and the Braves as an example, assuming that they are relatively close in ownership, I just think I'm going to end up with better all-around lineups with the Rays than the Braves, and they're very, very similar teams. Trevor Rogers has been overall good this year, like you said, 142 expected ISO to righties, 27.9% strikeout percentage. But the Braves were just another one of these teams where, yeah, the matchup's not great, but they just have so much power in this lineup that they can do a lot of damage in a hurry. So I do like Atlanta in the sense of they have a very high ceiling. I just think it's going to be kind of difficult to get to them. Jorge Soler, Travis d'Arnaud at 3,900 and 3,600 do stand out. Those are just really, really cheap price tags. That does also sort of help you balance out the total cost of the stack. But even individually, I think those guys look like good options. Adam Duvall at 4,200 is pretty cheap as well. So there is some value to be had from the Braves, I think.
Yeah, and Bracelet are probably my favorite one-off here, but on the whole, it's a team that, right now we have them projected for low ownership. If that's going to actually be the case, then I wouldn't hate getting to them, but far from a priority for me. Next game we have here, a couple more interesting pitching options, and already we've got Steve Leibowitz in the YouTube chat is saying that he might be interested in Valdez on Houston versus the Angels. Yeah, me too. This Angels offense is bad. They have Shohei Ohtani, who's also going to be pitching today, and other than him and the offense, it's a lot of either young prospects who haven't proven themselves yet, or just older veterans that have proven themselves to suck at this point in their career. And for Framber Valdez, if you look at his current ownership, he's projected to be, somewhat popular at 28%. And I guess that makes sense at his price point, but he's generally somebody who's not all that popular. And it does seem a little weird to me he's projected for the same ownership right now as Robbie Ray. But Framber Valdez is definitely somebody who I'm going to be mixing into my lineups at a pretty high clip.
Yeah, agreed. And even when you look at the pitchers around him in that price tier, there's a lot of talent. So Valdez is someone that he can be difficult at times to roster in DFS because it's kind of like Marcus Stroman, where he's too good a real life pitcher to be a cheap DFS pitcher, but he's not a very good strikeout pitcher. So because of DFS scoring, he ends up not usually being the best option in his price range once he's priced up with the high strikeout aces. But on a slate like this, it's a little bit different because you are actually getting a pretty big pretty big salary discount between him and Robbie Ray, even between him and Carlos Rodon. You have a big discount. So your lineup can look a little bit different, a little bit better with Valdez. And then when you look at the pitchers around him, Julio Urias is good, but he's facing the Padres. Tanner Houck we'll talk about. Relatively difficult matchup against the White Sox, but also concerns about how deep into the game he's going to go. So, you have that. You have Ohtani, who's got much better strikeout stuff than Valdez, but a really tough matchup against Houston. So Valdez just sort of looks like the best combination of talent and matchup in that price range. He has a 22% strikeout percentage this year. So while that's below average for his price point, it's not like he's a 16-17% guy. He'll still get his. The Angels typically help in that regard as well because they have a lot of guys that strike out at 30%. And Valdez is just, really, really, really good at getting ground balls. He I think is a little bit cheaper than he should be. I think he's a very good option.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the Angels, the only thing I really think there is to talk about, because the offense I'm not going to want to get to, but Shohei Ohtani is a pitching option, and also that's another reason I don't want to roster the offense is because you can't stack the Angels with Ohtani when it's a pitching option because, we're at this point in the season and still FanDuel and DraftKings. So there's no possible way. There's no way to make Ohtani the number one novelty in the game. Think about him. He pitches and hits really well, but we've taken that away from him in DFS, and that has not been added in yet. But as a pitching option today, Shohei Ohtani, obviously there's always upside in him, but he's going up against the Houston Astros offense, which, as we know, is about as good as it gets in baseball, even if they don't always hit when you and I roster them. But
never hit.
Never. This is a spot I think I'm going to be on both sides of because it looks like the Houston Astros right now not picking up ownership. But then at the same time, Ohtani, he's not picking up ownership either due to the matchup. So if we're actually going to get Ohtani around 1% owned and we're going to be getting the Houston Astros on the other side also at 1% owned, I think it makes sense to be on both sides of this for tournaments.
I agree with you in theory. I'm not sure if in practice I end up getting there just because of how big this slate is. Again, with raw ownership, even on the semi-popular teams being relatively low, I'm not sure how much of either side ends up getting pushed into my lineups. But I agree with you. This is definitely one of those spots that we talk about a lot where medium projections for the Astros and for Ohtani are going to be pretty mediocre because both sides are so good, but there's still massive amounts of upside in both sides. Ohtani has one of the highest strikeout percentages on the slate at 29.7% this season. When he is he can go out against anybody and just rack up strikeouts. It's not super likely that he just mows down the Astros here, but he certainly can. And when he does, when you think in, for tournaments, you're thinking about kind of what does it look like when Ohtani has his top, one of his top end games. it's a lot of strikeouts because it's Shohei Ohtani. So the ceiling for him at that price point is really, really high, even if he's not that likely to hit it because of the Astros. And then the same thing goes for Houston. If Ohtani is bad, we've certainly seen a few starts from Ohtani this year where he just does not have it. If you get bad Ohtani, the Astros are a team that's likely to just absolutely light him up and put up a massive score tonight. So it's not that they are very likely to have a good game, but their good game is just so much better than a lot of other teams. So in theory, at least, I think it makes sense to get to both sides. Once you start, accounting for there being 13 games, I'm not sure that I do that, but I would like to. I kind of hope that I do. And if you are, then, it's definitely fine.
It's funny. And the way the AL Cy Young race is kind of shaped up now, or like Carlos Rodon, who's going to be in the next game we're talking about, he's dealt with, I don't even think it's shoulder issues. I just think the White Sox are up so much in the division. They don't feel like they need to push Lance Lynn or Carlos Rodon. Garrett Cole started with a hamstring injury, and like Robbie Ray has kind of risen up the Cy Young odds just kind of by default. If Shohei Ohtani didn't have that one awful start against the Yankees where he got like 2 outs and gave up 7 runs, I think he'd be right there in the Cy Young picture, because he beat somebody with a low 2 ERA, and just that one game is inflating his numbers so much. There's just not one standout performer in the AL Cy Young race, but that also goes to just some of the variants of Ohtani, where it's like, hey, he's going to be really good 3 or 4 out of 5 starts, and then just going to be one start where he just can't find the strike zone and really struggled. So for me, at least, I generally think I'm probably going to be getting to a little bit of Houston. Your point about the size of the slate does mean that maybe there's a chance to just get squeezed out, but we've been in a variance in Ohtani that, to me, if both of them are going to be 1% owned, I do have a little bit of interest in both sides. Now, the next game we're here to talk about, and this is somebody whose ownership I think is going to change. Carlos Rodon is currently projected for 21% ownership. I don't think there's any reason for the White Sox to push him to throw a big amount of innings tonight. So I don't think the shoulder injury is real for him. They've held him out of starts, a little bit over the last month, but I also think this is just a product of they have a massive lead in the division. There's no need to push him to throw 100 pitches or anything like that. He didn't throw a lot of innings last year. He's somebody with an injury history. So Rodon at 10,300, he's just a no-go for me.
Yeah, it's tough just because for one, the matchup, yes, Rodon's likely to have success against anybody, but it's a pretty tough matchup for him. He's priced really close to Robbie Ray. And like you said, wouldn't be surprising to just see them, kind of pump the brakes on Carlos Rodon. He threw 77 pitches against the Pirates. He threw 67 the start before that against Toronto. 85 pitches against the Red Sox or something at 10-3. Yeah, he could put up a massive score. He's a really, really good pitcher. He's got the highest strikeout percentage on the slate, but not on a slate this big, especially because right now we have Rodon projected for ownership as well. It would be a little bit different if later it's like 40% Ray and 4% Rodon or something. But on a slate this big, again, it's just, I know I've mentioned it a lot, but it's your lineups are just going to typically be low enough owned that you don't need to really make a whole lot of moves like going Rodon over Ray if you think Ray is better. And I think in this spot, Ray's better for multiple reasons.
And the other thing I'll add about Rodon is the show. Once again, they held him out of his last start because of what they called shoulder soreness. But once again, I don't think that's actually real. But that start against the Pirates came September 1st. That was 9 days ago. So I don't even know that he's going to get significantly more pitches than he had in that start. And he was going pretty well that outing, and they still only gave him 77. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's capped, somewhere around the same, and that's just going to really limit his upside at this kind of price point. But on the other side with the Boston Red Sox, I don't really know that I want to be stacking them in this spot either.
Yeah, me neither. It's another one of these teams where, I'm never going to be upset if I get to the Red Sox because they're good, but you kind of got to draw the line somewhere when there's 26 teams, and I don't think stacking up against Carlos Rodon is going to be something at the top of my list.
And then on the other side, we've got Tanner Houck pitching for Boston, and he has had some really high upside starts this year. He has really good strikeout stuff. I don't like the matchup in Chicago, but I will say this. We have seen a bunch of games now over the last couple of weeks, because the same thing that applies for the pitching with the White Sox, where they have Lance Lynn on the injured list. They've had Carlos Rodon on the injured list or limited due to his shoulder soreness, but they're really just getting him ready for the playoffs. We've seen spots recently where the White Sox just rest like half their lineup. We know that Tim Anderson isn't going to be out there today. So I think there's a sneaky potential for Tanner Houck to be facing a fairly weak White Sox lineup.
Yeah, my concern here is that the Red Sox they've kind of like yo-yoed Houck here as far as what they will let him do. He was pitching really, really well his last start against Cleveland, 5 innings, 7 strikeouts, pulled him at 68 pitches. Start before that, threw 90 pitches, threw 90 pitches to start before that. Pulled him at 58 pitches against the Yankees, 89 the one before that against Tampa Bay. So I don't know what they're going to do as far as when they're going to take him out of this game. At $8,800, if he's not going to get much ownership, which right now he is not projected for any, I do think he is a pretty good tournament option because he's got strikeout stuff. He has struck out 29.8% of hitters this year, 3.27 xFIP, 5.8% walk percentage. He's been legitimately good and has a very high ceiling on, for basically lack of a better phrase, on it, like a per pitch basis. He offers massive upside. It's just your guess is as good as mine when the Red Sox decide he's done pitching today. But we do at least know that there's the potential for him to get 90 pitches because we've seen him do it 3 of his last 5 starts. So I do, as long as he's not getting ownership, I do think he is a pretty high upside tournament option. Certainly someone you can use to pivot away from that Framber Valdez ownership. Much better strikeout pitcher than Valdez. If they were to throw a similar amount of pitches, I think they project very similarly. Valdez has the better matchup. Houck is going to most likely get more strikeouts. The reason Valdez will project better overall is that we can just say with a lot more confidence that if he's pitching well, he's going to throw 90 to 100 pitches.
Yeah, and that's something also we're keeping an eye on that White Sox lineup. Let's see who's in or out of that lineup because this is a team that really doesn't have that much to play for at this point. Bringing up the standings right now, they are currently 10 games over the Cleveland Indians for first place in the Central. They have just about locked up that division. There's only 22 games left to play, so there's going to be a lot of rest for the White Sox over the next few weeks. Next game that we've here to talk.
One thing I do want to point out with Houck that I think is a legitimate concern, especially because we actually saw the Red Sox do this with Chris Sale when he came back too. For whatever reason that makes no sense, the Red Sox do seem to think that the number of innings matter, like more so than pitches. Like if you look at Houck, even those starts I was going back mentioning, the different pitch counts, 5 innings, 5 1/3, 4 2/3, 4-5. We saw that same thing with Sale where he threw like 89 pitches in 5 innings and it was like, oh, okay, cool. They let him throw 90 pitches. And then they pulled him at like 70 pitches in 5 innings his next time out or something like that. So again, not to say that that's going to be the case today, but it is concerning that the Red Sox seem to be stuck in 1985 where innings are more important than the pitches.
Yeah, I do think that is funny where we see teams like, hey, this pitcher's on an 160 innings limit. It's like, all right, what if he's a 3-pitch inning every time he goes out? We're just taking him out after 5 innings because he's gassed. Where as if throwing 5 innings where you're at 60 pitches is more taxing than throwing 90 pitches through 4 innings where you can't find the strike zone. But I'm also hoping it's a situation where we get some kind of information from beat reporters ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption for now is you're getting about 5 innings from Houck. It doesn't matter how many pitches he threw, and even that, like if he gets 5 innings, he can still go, 20, if he were to get the win, 20, 25 points. But it's just really frustrating. Like let the guy throw, if you're going to let him throw 90 pitches in 5 innings, let him throw 90 and 7, just pull him when he gets the 90 pitches. It's the same thing, especially like the other thing that like some teams will mention it. And it's always really refreshing when they do. The tax on your arm when like it's, nobody's on base and it's not like a high leverage situation. It's just different. And so like you'll have some teams be like, oh yeah, we were fine letting him go 7 innings because he was never in trouble and it was just a really easy 7 innings. If he's pitching 7 innings, if he's able to go 7 innings and 90 pitches, he probably wasn't taxed a lot either. It makes no sense to be capping him at 5 innings, but it seems like that's more or less what they're doing.
Yeah. So once again, we'll see if we get any kind of information from the beat reporters and what that White Sox lineup ends up looking like. But for now, moving on, we have Griffin Jax starting for the Minnesota Twins. Griffin Jax, he's no good, and his numbers this year have been pretty poor. 6.79 ERA, 6.17 expected ERA, which means for the 15th consecutive slate in a row, we have just massive chalk going to the Kansas City Royals. The Royals were currently projected to be the 2nd most popular stack on the slate, and I can't remember the last time I was overweights the field on the Royals. It's the same thing every single night. They're projected to be massively popular. And I end up looking at it and be like, oh, here's a team, 16% projected ownership, 8.4% chance to be a top stack. It's clearly a good spot for Griffin Jax, a clearly good spot for them against Griffin Jax. But if these numbers hold true, I'm just not going to get into the Royals.
Yeah, really good spot against Jax. But again, we just see this so often with Kansas City because outside of the very obvious, Salvador Perez, everyone else is pretty cheap. Mondesi gives you third base, shortstop, eligibility, which makes it really easy to get him into lineups. Jax hasn't been good. Kansas City is not a great offense in terms of power, but they do give you stolen base upside. They do have some power, particularly again in Perez. They're kind of similar to the Brewers to me, where a lot of them are going to project as top point per dollar options at their positions, which is fine. You're just going to want to make sure that you have, lower owned guys around them.
Yeah, and still though, I don't think, and I'm just pulling up some of the individual ownership for the Kansas City Royals hitters to see if there's anybody that has a slightly lower ownership share. Here they are. I don't know why it took me a second to find them, but yeah, it's kind of the same thing every day. We see Salvador Perez is 26% projected ownership, Mondesi 22. But even if you go down the lineup, it's not like there's any kind of ownership reprieve later on. We've got Benintendi projected for 17% ownership. Guys more towards the bottom of the order, even them Hunter Dozier project for 9% ownership, 10% for Michael A. Taylor. Just not a team that I think looks overly appealing. Cash games, yeah, you're probably going to want to play Mondesi and Perez, but even Mondesi, he has a little bit of power upside. He has a little bit of stolen base upside, but I still don't think that he's like a terrific big league hitter. He hasn't really shown himself to be consistent. So definitely, if Mondesi is going to be 20 to 30% owned again, I think he's somebody to be underweight to in GPPs, especially considering his price point.
Yeah, agreed. Like he gives you upside, but there's just going to be 25 other shortstops, 25 other third basemen, give or take. So like the chances of him, even if he projects as the best point per dollar option, again, the chances of him actually being the best are extremely low. So it really just kind of comes back to what does your lineup need? Do you have a bunch of low owned guys and you just kind of need to round it out with like the most likely guy to have success? Then by all means go to Mondesi. But typically that's just not going to get him into 30+% of lineups.
And then on the other side, we have young prospect Daniel Lynch on the mound for the Royals, and somebody else who you and I have done quite a few shows where he started. Young pitcher, a lot of arm talent, has not quite delivered the results this year. On a slate this size, I don't see a need to get to him, but the Minnesota Twins, who are going to be somewhat popular, projected for about 5% ownership right now. There's other teams that I just think I'd rather get to than Minnesota, when they're a team that we have like a 2.5% chance to be a top stack and a little bit of ownership going to them. So Daniel Lynch, I'm personally not going to be interested in. There's other value pitchers I like, but Twins, Lynch, is there anything here that stands out to you?
The price point stands out. I think he's underpriced just in terms of he's a stretched out starter that's been okay since coming back from the minors. Really, really struggled his last time out against the White Sox. I don't think that was too surprising. He's just been, he's been mediocre even since coming back, but definitely been better than he was his first, I think it was 3 starts before he got demoted when he was absolute garbage. But he threw 104 pitches 2 starts ago, 88, 98, 100. He's someone that is, I think just, he's one of these guys, he should be 63, 6,400 instead of 5,300. So probably not going to be necessary on this slate. I don't love the matchup against the Twins, but I think just, a little bit underpriced if you for some reason need a pitcher that cheap.
Yeah. And I think that's fine, especially since the Twins are picking up a little bit of ownership. If you do need a cheap pitcher, I don't really have an issue with Daniel Lynch, but not going to be a priority for me whatsoever. Now, the next game we have here to talk about, and 4 games left. If you guys haven't done it already, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots more baseball content and football content coming up today. Also, the sponsor of the show is Jock Market. If you guys are new to Jock Market, head on over, download the app. If you're making your first deposit, use the promo code Awesemo and get up to a $50 deposit bonus when you sign up. But next game here to talk about, Tyler Mahle on the mound for the Cincinnati Reds in St. Louis. And what are we going to do with Mahle here? Because it is a matchup that, at least on paper against St. Louis, should benefit him. It's a very right-hand dominant lineup. Obviously, Tyler Mahle, a right-hand pitcher. So there's strikeout upside there. He's been super inconsistent this year. I'm curious to see what we actually get for ownership on Mahle. Right now, it's 7.5%. That would make him a good contrarian option to me.
Yeah, I agree. He has the upside, at least, where you do have a more popular lineup. If you're using some of those Kansas City bats, the Milwaukee bats we talked about earlier, taking that ownership discount on Tyler Mahle does make some sense. We know the strikeout stuff is there. He has a 28.2% strikeout percentage this year, 3.75 xFIP. Not the best strikeout matchup against the Cardinals. Not a team that really strikes out a lot, but Mahle's good enough to get some on his own. Also only has a 24.3% strikeout percentage against righties this year compared to 32.5% against lefties. He's given up more power to righties. It's just a really weird spot where, like, if you look at what Tyler Mahle's done this year, it actually is a pretty scary lineup because you do have so much right-handed power. But kind of taking a step back, the point of Tyler Mahle, I guess, on this slate is a pitcher that can strike out a lot of dudes that is relatively low owned in lineups where you have more popular hitters. From that standpoint, you're not really worried about what is the most likely outcome here. And that, I think, is a relatively mediocre start. It's more so, again, like we're talking about with Ohtani, what's it look like when Tyler Mahle is good? And what it looks like is a lot of strikeouts at low ownership. So that's, that's really all that I think you need to care about, because I don't think anyone's looking at this like, oh, I'm going to play, 50% Tyler Mahle. This is fantastic. If that's the case, maybe, look a little bit deeper and realize that this could go south in a hurry. But assuming you're just using him as, you know, a lower owned, high upside guy, that stuff is all true, even if the matchup isn't great.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'm going to mention about Molly, and this is a point that it kind of has resonated with me throughout the year, and it's something that you had said probably like 2 months ago. We're doing a show together. Is there was a lot of pitchers that were significantly impacted by the crackdown on sticky substances in June that totally changed pitchers. But you had brought up a little bit after that there's going to be pitchers that just kind of work their way through it and figure it out, where it was a big adjustment period. But as it goes on, some of these guys who have talent should be able to improve or figure out the different pitch mixes or what they want to, you know, be throwing in terms of like, hey, I don't have this good slider anymore. I'm going to try to change to a curveball or maybe something like that. And Tyler Mahle, although he did struggle with his control his last time out, you know, we've seen his overall strikeout and walk numbers be much better over the last month or so than they were in that first month after that came into effect. So Tyler Mahle to me is somebody who I maybe have a little bit more confidence in than I did, you know, 6 weeks ago, and more so than anything. He's low owned today against a right-hand dominant lineup. There's upside in Tyler Mahle. His recent strikeouts and starts 8, 6, 8, 5, 7, 10. He's capable of generating swing and misses. So he's somebody, as long as he remains low owned, I think he's a good pivot in tournaments.
Yeah, agreed completely.
And then on the other side, John Lester is going to be on the mound for the St. Louis Cardinals. And John Lester, I guess there's starts where he's gotten really lucky, but on the whole, I still think he's a pitcher who's not any good. I generally want to be stacking against him. The ownership right now looks like it's going to be there with the Reds, but just because I think that John Lester is such a poor starting pitcher, it's still a team I want to get some exposure to.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, the Reds as a team have struggled against left-handed pitching this year, but again, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when you look at who's in the lineup. And then on top of that, John Lester's not your average left-handed pitcher at this point. So it looks like a good spot for the Reds. 13.5% strikeout percentage against righties for Lester, 176 expected ISO. Going back to the start of the 2019 season, you know, just looking at some of the numbers for these Cincinnati hitters, Nick Castellanos, 267 expected ISO. Eugenio Suarez, 242 expected ISO. Farmer's got a 189 expected ISO. Aquino's at 229. Joey Votto is fine, 152. And then, you know, guys like Stevenson and India can do some damage as well. So I think that, you know, left-hand, like whenever you look at splits in one season against left-handed pitching, you're still getting a pretty small sample anyway. And then you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of good lefties mixed in there. A lot of times it's lefty relievers, which are going to drive numbers down. So John Lester is, I think, pretty clearly worse than what those numbers are based on. So not my favorite stack here, but I do think there's a lot of upside, particularly Castellanos looks really good. I like the $3,600 salary on Suarez as well.
Yeah, and 3-run shot in the YouTube chat said, will John Lester stonewall again? I hope not. His numbers generally suck this year. He's got a 4.89 ERA, a 5.04 expected ERA. If you look at his ZiPS projections, they projected for a 4.52 ERA the rest of the season. Steamer 4.76, and this is an offense in the Reds that I do think is overall good. Even if they had some issues overall for the season against left-handed pitching, it's not something I totally buy into. And Lester, I just think he's at a point in his career where he's not generally able to get anybody out. He has an 89.1 average fastball velocity now. That is by far the lowest of his career. It's been on the decline each of the last 5 seasons. So give me some exposure to the Reds here. Now, the next game we have here to talk about 2 pitchers that do not generate a lot of strikeouts, or at least I don't think are going to generate a lot of strikeouts, in Glenn Otto and Paul Blackburn. Glenn Otto was somewhat popular in his last start. He was also somebody that I got to a little bit, but it was mostly a price point thing. If I remember correctly, it was like 4,000 or 5,000 his last time out. And today, going up against a pretty tough Oakland A's offense, I think there is a chance for Oakland to find some success here. And Oakland, as they are currently projected for only 3% ownership, that looks like a stack I'm going to want to get to, because Glenn Otto, kind of an older minor league pitcher and was never really that heralded as a prospect, even if he was a piece of the trade that the Rangers got in exchange for Joey Gallo. The minor league numbers for him, yeah, they've been okay this year, but once again, I don't think he's somebody who should be looking at as a blue chip prospect. So give me the Oakland A's offense today. Yeah,
I mean, and the thing is, the amount of volatility with someone like Otto, you know, yeah, he's put up good numbers in the minors this year, but he has now thrown a combined in his career like 40 innings above AA. So even if you think this guy's going to be good, there's a good chance that he's just up and down right now because he's not ready for the major leagues yet. Texas, you know, brought him up because there's no real reason for them not to. I guarantee if Texas were in a playoff race right now, Glenn Otto would not be starting a game for them. So I think that it is a really high upside spot for the A's. The park sucks. It's supposed to be like 60 degrees. We know it's a really tough park to hit in. Foul territory makes foul balls become outs. The outfield is massive. The ball doesn't carry. So all of that works against them, but still, 4.7 implied run total for the A's. All of that stuff is baked into that. You have tons and tons of power in this lineup. Matt Olson looks great. I think if Josh Harrison's at the top of the lineup, he's going to project as a good value. Jed Lowry's only 3,600, which looks good. So I do like the A's right now. We have them projected for about 3% aggregate ownership, which looks pretty nice. 5% chance of being the top stack. So right now, even though I do hate the park, I think that the A's look pretty good.
Yeah, and then on the other side with the Texas Rangers offense, I don't know if this is a team I want to stack, but the prices here are so cheap and there's no ownership. I think a lot of these guys make sense as value plays or one-offs. Leody Taveras, he's min price, expected to lead off at 5% ownership, and he's the only player in the entire lineup that's projected for over 1% ownership. And for the most part, these guys are really cheap. The most expensive hitter in the lineup is Adolis Garcia at 3,900. Paul Blackburn as a pitcher does not generate swing and misses. He's not particularly good. So the Rangers, I don't know that this is the highest probability stack, but they do have pretty good odds of being the top value of the day, and there's no ownership going here. So what do you make of Texas?
Yeah, I think they'll be useful. Just, we talked about Milwaukee being a really good value stack. We talked about Kansas City, having a lot of value. Texas isn't going to give you hitters that you feel as good about as either of those teams, and the park's really bad. Blackburn is typically really good at getting ground balls. Only a 3.4 implied run total for Texas. All of that said, if you need a cheap bat and you're in a position where you don't want it to be a popular hitter, from the Brewers or from Kansas City, you're still going to get good point per dollar projections from guys like Nate Lowe, Adolis Garcia, Leody Taveras if he's leading off at 2K. So not a team where I'm expecting to, make my lineups and be like, oh, cool, I have 20% Texas or something like that. That would not make me feel good at all. But there is a place for these guys, I think, in lineups where maybe who do we have? So we have Toronto getting ownership right now, right? Let's say you paid up for Toronto, you have Robbie Ray. You're not really going to want to go to Kansas City or Milwaukee in those lineups because you already have so much ownership going to your stack and to your pitcher. In lineups like that where you need value bats, I think Texas does serve a role.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm looking at here, especially if I think you made a good point about Milwaukee being a cheap team that a lot of people are getting to. If you want to look for a pivot as one-offs, I think this is where Texas come in handy. I don't think Paul Blackburn's any good. I'm certainly not considering Paul Blackburn, and I'm generally looking at pitchers against the Texas Rangers. But there's so many guys here. The number one priority for me though is Leody Taveras, especially if he's not going to pick up ownership. He's somebody I think makes sense. In all formats at a min price tag, even in cash games, if you needed to save salary for any reason where you needed somebody min price, Taveras is somebody that I would not mind getting to. But do you think you might be making 5-man Texas stacks as well?
Would be very, 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 very surprised. The reason being, for one, there's so many other offenses to get to. Raw ownership isn't going to be that high in a lot of spots, but also Blackburn's not getting any ownership, so you're not getting any negative correlation there. And then the way pitching is laid out too. If you had Robbie Ray at the top and then you had, I don't know, give me Cole against the Angels or something at 11K, they'll be okay. Well, there's gonna be some lineups where maybe I just want to pay $22,000 a pitcher and I need some really, really cheap 5-mans in low probability spots. That's not the case here because I can use Anderson. I can use Marquez, I can use Daniel Lynch for really cheap if I really want to. So I just don't think that the way pitching is laid out is going to force me to a lot of really bad 5-man stacks either.
All right, just 2 games left for us to talk about today, but don't forget, guys, football season is back. I'm sure you guys are well aware of that by now, and there's all kinds of football content coming up on the Awesemo YouTube channel. And in general, I don't think you want to be playing NFL DFS without us, and there's pretty cheap ways to dip your toes into some of the tools we have on the site. We currently have an offer for our NFL Express Pass for only $1 for the weekly pass. So if you're looking to just make lineups for week 1, only $1 using the promo code DAC. That'll get you access to pretty much everything we have for NFL DFS. All our tools, our premium Slack chat, just $1 for the first week of the season using the promo code DAC. That offer is valid through Monday, September 13th. Also, if you're a new member and you're looking to sign up for a little bit more than just the weekly pass, you can use the promo code MLB Strategy Show, and that'll get you 25% off an entire first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So that'll get you access to all the tools we have over at the site. That is using the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters. So for sure, get in on football this season and come join us in Slack chat. I don't know that Adam's going to answer your questions, but I'm very needy. I will answer all of your questions there. And it's only $1 using the promo code DAC for the football NFL Express Pass. Now, 2 games left here to talk about. And the next one here, a couple of interesting pitching options. Julio Urias on the mound for the Dodgers up against Joe Musgrove for the Padres. Now, I kind of view both of these pitchers in this spot as somewhat similar, as in they have significant upside, but also there's downside as well because the offenses are really good. But Julio Urias only project for 3% ownership. Joe Musgrove project for less than 1% ownership. These are generally not offenses I want to target with pitchers, but I think both these guys warrant shares in tournaments.
Yeah, I feel pretty similarly about these guys as I did about Tyler Mahle, where, yeah, the matchups suck, but everyone is aware of that. Not to say that Tyler Mahle's matchups is as bad as these two, but same kind of idea, I think, where everyone's aware that the matchup against the Padres is less than ideal and that you're going to, feel better going to Framber Valdez against the Angels. But still, only a 3.6 implied run total for San Diego, not drastically different than the Angels. Urias is the better strikeout pitcher between himself and Valdez, 26.7% for the season, 3.61 xFIP. There's just probably going to be a bigger ownership gap than there really should be between Valdez and Urias. So, as always, it's going to come down to what does the rest of your lineup look like. If you have a bunch of low-owned hitters and you just need the top projected pitcher in that price range, use Valdez. If you have some more popular pitchers and you need someone that is lower owned but gives you the same ceiling as Valdez, by all means go to Urias, even though the matchup is a little bit more difficult. Matchups typically don't really lower your ceiling. It just makes you a little bit less likely to get there. And so Urias does still have a very high ceiling here. And the same thing goes for Musgrove. Between the two, I would prefer Urias just because he's a little bit cheaper. I think the matchup's a little bit better against the Padres than it is for Musgrove against the Dodgers. But it's the same kind of thing. The Dodgers make it less likely that Musgrove has a big game, but Musgrove still has a 28% strikeout percentage this year, 3.42 xFIP. If you played, if Musgrove just made 100 starts against the Dodgers, he's still going to have a relatively high percentage of starts where he just goes out there and has a really good game because he's still a good strikeout pitcher and, a good pitcher overall. So both guys, I think, they'll be useful in lineups where you have higher owned stacks. Maybe you have Robbie Ray, maybe you have Ian Anderson, a pitcher that's picking up ownership and you just want to save some ownership. These guys still give you high ceilings, even though the matchups are less than ideal.
And I still like the Dodgers as a stack. I mean, how many times have we seen Joe Musgrove it doesn't, like Joe Musgrove, we've talked about how much, or at least I talk about on every show, how much I dislike him, but this is a spot where he finally isn't picking up ownership and generally is very popular, but anybody who's rushed Joe Musgrove this year knows about his unpredictability. He could go score 40 fantasy points against a great offense. He also go up against the Arizona Diamondbacks and score, 0 fantasy points, gives up 5 runs in the first inning, and he tanks a whole bunch of lineups. So I think this still makes sense as an upside spot for the Dodgers. They're only projected for 1% ownership, and the bad version of Musgrove might show up today. So the Dodgers, we know how powerful that offense is. It's a pretty appealing large field GPP stack to me.
Yeah, 100% right there with you. Not even like it's a low implied run total for the Dodgers, 4.5 here against Musgrove. Just a really, really good lineup, not getting ownership. Kind of the same thing that we said about, or same reasoning as we said about the pitchers. Facing Joe Musgrove makes it less likely the Dodgers have a massive game. But if they were to face him, in 100 straight games, they're still going to have plenty of blow up spots, much more than the 1 to 2% ownership suggests that they would.
All right, now to wrap it up, we only have one game left here to talk about, and then we're going to turn this over to football guys. They're going to be doing a football show, and then I'm going to be doing a football show with Steve Buzzard later in the day, talking about the Yahoo slate. So we've got all the different slates covered. So like this video, also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get access to all of that stuff, right when we're going live. But we've got here Madison Bumgarner on the mound for Arizona, Marco Gonzalez for Seattle, 2 bad offenses and 2 pitchers that kind of had up and down success this year. Marco Gonzalez picked up a little bit of ownership his last time out in a positive matchup against the Diamondbacks, and then absolutely got his face kicked in. So overall, what do you make of this game? Because to me, I think we're kind of closing it out with something I don't have a lot of interest in.
Yeah, not a ton of interest for me. Bumgarner is at a price point where he's just kind of whatever, not great strikeout stuff. I don't think he's a great pitcher at this point in his career. For the season, he's only got a 20.5% strikeout percentage. He's going to be most likely facing a lot of right-handed bats in this Seattle lineup. Against righties this year, he only has struck out 19.2% with a 186 expected ISO. So not a ton of interest in him. I do think, Mitch Haniger is going to look pretty good, Ty France, Abraham Toro, but they're also priced up. So it'll be pretty tough to prioritize Seattle. On the other side, assuming it is Marco Gonzalez, his salaries come up to 8,300. Not a very good strikeout pitcher at all for the season. He's only struck out 18.3% of hitters, 1.92 home runs per nine. He's allowed a 202 expected ISO to right-handed hitters. Not a ton of right-handed bats that you're really scared of in the Diamondbacks lineup. You could certainly look to Nick Ahmed for value at 2,800. Kettle Marte, Carson Kelly, they're priced up, but they're fine. But overall, I'm with you. Just not pitchers I'm really interested in, and offenses that I think are in okay spots. But when you compare them to a lot of other offenses we talked about, they don't really look that good.
Yeah, and Marco Gonzalez, he's pitched better over the last 6 weeks, but he scored over 20 fantasy points like 3 times the entire season. There just isn't enough strikeout upside to really generate anything that makes a whole lot of sense to me, especially at this price point. It would be different if he was, 65 or 6,600. Then I think we could look at him as a potential pivot off of some of the guys like Herman Marquez or Ian Anderson to pick up ownership. But at that price point, that is just going to be a no-go for me. So that is going to do it for us today. But once again, guys, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's plenty more content coming up today. Good luck.